My name is Lyra, and I am 24 years old now. For most of my life, however, I had a different title. In the cobbled streets of Silver Creek, in the shadow of the Eldorian Mountains, I was known only as the Cursed Maiden. I was a living ghost story, a walking omen that people used to frighten their children into behaving. I never imagined that the grand, foolish gesture of a bored prince, a public spectacle designed to challenge a kingdom's deepest prejudice, would end up becoming the truest and most profound chapter of my entire existence. It was a story that began with a lie whispered at my birth and ended with a truth declared before the entire court. Before I dive into how a make believe courtship, born of chivalry and defiance, managed to blossom into a love that reshaped a kingdom, I'd love it if you let me know where in the world you're watching from today in the comments below. And if you've ever felt like an outsider or been judged unfairly, go ahead and hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. For all the new viewers here, please consider subscribing to join this wonderful community of people who understand that our true worth is never defined by the opinions of others. The curse, as they called it, was born with me. I arrived in the world during a total solar eclipse, a moment when the sun vanished from the sky and the world was plunged into an unnerving midday twilight. On that very same day, a sudden, inexplicable blight swept through the fertile fields of the valley, turning green stalks to black, withered husks overnight. It was a coincidence, a cruel twist of atmospheric and agricultural fate. But in a place like Silver Creek, a town that prided itself on logic but still harbored a deep well of ancient fear, coincidence was not an acceptable answer. They needed a reason, a vessel for their terror, a traveling soothsayer. A man with hungry eyes and a flair for drama saw his opportunity. He stood in the town square, pointing a bony finger towards my parents' small cottage on the edge of the woods, and declared that the eclipsed child was a harbinger of misfortune, a blight upon the land given human form. The name stuck faster than mud in a spring thaw. My childhood was a study in isolation. Other children were forbidden from playing with me. Their games would halt and their laughter would die the moment I rounded a corner. I'd see them cluster together, whispering, their wide eyes following me with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. Sometimes, a braver one, egged on by his friends, would hurl a pebble or a clump of dirt in my direction, their shouts of "cursed one" chasing me all the way home. The mothers were worse. They would pull their children behind their skirts, making signs to ward off evil, their faces masks of cold piety. "Stay away from her, Thomas," I once heard a woman hiss to her son. "Her shadow can sour the milk." I learned to walk with my gaze fixed on the ground, memorizing the unique pattern of every cobblestone in the village, because it was less painful than meeting the eyes of my neighbors. Merchants would serve me last, if at all. They would handle my coins with tongs or drop them immediately into a bowl of water as if to cleanse them of my touch. More than once, I was turned away from the apothecary when I had a fever, the man behind the counter shaking his head grimly. "I'll not have your ill fortune spoiling my remedies, girl." My parents, simple weavers, did their best. They loved me fiercely, but they were worn down by the constant shunning. Their business suffered. Neighbors they had known for decades crossed the street to avoid them. The weight of my existence was a constant, crushing burden on their shoulders, and I saw the light in their eyes dim a little more each year. They died of a lung fever when I was 17, huddled together in their bed. The village whispered it was the curse finally claiming those closest to me. I knew it was just sorrow and hard living that had worn their bodies thin. After their passing, I was truly alone. I survived on the small patch of land behind our cottage, a place no one else dared to tread. There, I cultivated a garden. It was my sanctuary, a riot of life and color that defied the label attached to me. I learned the language of plants, which herbs could soothe a cough, which flowers would keep pests away from the vegetables, which roots, when boiled, could ease a troubled stomach. The earth did not judge me. The sun, when it shone, did not discriminate. In my garden, I was not the cursed maiden. I was just Lyra. I talked to my plants. I read old books my mother had left me, and I built a wall of quiet dignity around the core of my heart. They could call me what they wished, but they could not touch the person I was in the quiet solitude of my own home. It was on a crisp autumn afternoon, when the leaves were the color of fire and gold, that Prince Alaric arrived in Silver Creek. The royal tour was an annual tradition, a way for the monarch's heir to see the kingdom and be seen by his people. But the whispers that preceded him spoke of a prince who was restless, cynical, and utterly weary of his duties. He was tired of the fawning courtiers, the endless political maneuvering, and most of all, the parade of impeccably pedigreed but vapid noblewomen his father, the king, kept pushing in his direction. They were all the same, with their practiced smiles, their grasping ambitions thinly veiled by courtly graces, and their conversation as shallow as a summer puddle. Alaric saw Silver Creek as just another stop on a tedious journey. He endured the welcoming ceremony with a polite, detached air, his eyes scanning the crowd with a profound boredom. He saw the nervous smiles, the rehearsed bows, the same hopeful glances from local merchants and minor lords. Then he saw me. I was standing at the very back of the crowd, near the edge of the woods, having been drawn out by the commotion. I wasn't looking at him. I was watching the people, my expression one of calm, detached observation. As the ceremony ended and the crowd began to disperse, a merchant's cart, overloaded with apples, hit a rut and overturned. Apples scattered everywhere. People laughed and scrambled to help, but when a few rolled to my feet, a space immediately cleared around me. No one would pick up the fruit that had touched the ground near the cursed maiden. I simply bent down, gathered the 3 apples that had rolled nearest to me, and walked over to the flustered merchant. I placed them carefully back in his cart without a word. He stared at the apples as if they were venomous snakes, and after I had walked away, he picked them up with a rag and threw them into the gutter. Prince Alaric saw the whole exchange. He saw the casual, ingrained cruelty. He saw the merchant's fear. But most of all, he saw the way I walked away, my back straight, my head held high, without a single glance back. There was no anger, no pleading, just a quiet, unbreachable dignity. It was more regal than any curtsy he had seen at court. Intrigued, he turned to his captain of the guard, a stoic man named Brennan. "Who is that woman?" he asked, his voice low. Brennan's face tightened. "That is Lyra, your highness. The locals have a superstition about her. They call her the cursed maiden." Alaric's eyes narrowed, a flicker of interest cutting through his apathy. He had Brennan recount the story, the eclipse, the blight, the soothsayer. The more he heard, the more a slow burn of indignation began to replace his boredom. It was absurd. It was unjust. And in the bleak landscape of his meticulously arranged life, this raw, foolish injustice felt like the first real thing he had encountered in years. He decided he needed to speak with me. The next day, he dismissed his entourage, claiming he wished to inspect the royal forestry preserves alone, a plausible excuse that Brennan helped facilitate. He found me not far from my cottage, in the woods, gathering mushrooms in a wicker basket. He approached quietly, not wanting to startle me. When I finally looked up and saw him, I froze. My first instinct was the one I had learned over a lifetime, to make myself small, to retreat, to become invisible. I expected the same look of disgust or fear I saw on every other face, but his expression was different. It was curious, intense, and devoid of any judgment. "Lyra?" he asked. His voice was deeper than I had imagined. I could only nod. My throat suddenly tight. "My guard told me the stories they tell about you." My heart sank. Here it comes, I thought. The pity, or the lecture, or the royal command to leave this place and take my misfortune with me. "I want to hear it from you," he continued, surprising me. "Do you believe you are cursed?" I took a steadying breath, the scent of damp earth filling my lungs. I met his gaze directly for the first time. His eyes were the color of a stormy sea, sharp and intelligent. "I believe I was born on an unfortunate day, Your Highness," I said, my voice clearer than I expected. "And I believe people fear what they cannot explain. They need someone to blame for the world's uncertainties. I am simply convenient." My answer seemed to strike him. He was silent for a long moment, studying my face. He saw no self-pity, no plea for help. He saw only a woman who had accepted a cruel reality and had refused to be broken by it. He thought of Lady Edith, the leading candidate for his hand in marriage, a woman of impeccable lineage and breathtaking beauty, who had once wept for an hour because a shipment of silk from the south was delayed. He thought of the grasping lords and ladies of his court, their lives a constant ballet of petty slights and manufactured dramas. And then he looked at me, a woman branded an outcast, who possessed more substance and grace in her little finger than the whole lot of them combined. A reckless, audacious idea sparked in his mind. It was a protest, a piece of grand political theater, and a chivalrous impulse all rolled into one. It was a way to shake the foundations of this complacent, superstitious town. It was a way to thumb his nose at his father, at the council, at the entire system of arranged alliances. And it was, he told himself, a way to offer justice to a woman who had been denied it for her entire life. The people of this kingdom pride themselves on their enlightenment, he said, his voice ringing with a newfound purpose. Their observatories map the stars, their engineers build marvels of clockwork. This superstition is a rot in the heart of Eldoria. It is an embarrassment, and I will not have it. I stared at him, bewildered. What are you going to do? He gave me a small, almost dangerous smile. I am going to prove them wrong. I am going to do something so public, so undeniable, that it will shatter their fear once and for all. I had no idea then how his plan, born of princely indignation, would irrevocably entwine our lives, setting us on a path that was far more perilous and far more beautiful than either of us could have ever imagined. The next morning, I was summoned to the town square by a royal decree. 2 guards arrived at my cottage, their expressions a mixture of official duty and personal apprehension. They kept their distance, delivering the summons from the gate. I walked to the square with a sense of dread coiling in my stomach. The entire village was there, their faces a sea of confusion and suspicion. A temporary wooden dais had been erected, and on it stood Prince Alaric, resplendent in his formal attire. Lord Valerius, his chief adviser, stood beside him, his face a thunderous mask of disapproval. Lady Edith was also present, having arrived with her entourage the night before, and her beautiful face was pinched with displeasure at this unscheduled delay. Alaric's eyes found me in the crowd, and a guard escorted me, to my horror, through the parted sea of people and onto the dais beside him. A collective gasp rippled through the square. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, burning with fear and resentment. I wanted to run, to disappear back into the safety of my woods, but Alaric gave a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of his head. He then raised his hand for silence, and his voice, amplified by the strange acoustics of the enclosed square, boomed across the assembled crowd. "People of Silver Creek, people of Eldoria," he began. "For centuries, this kingdom has been a beacon of reason and progress. We have mapped the heavens and harnessed the elements. Yet here, in this valley, a shadow of ancient, baseless fear is allowed to fester, a fear that has been directed at one woman." He turned slightly and gestured to me. I felt myself shrink under the weight of the attention. "You have called her cursed. You have blamed her for every misfortune, from a failed crop 2 decades ago to a spilled pail of milk this morning. You have shunned her, reviled her, and denied her the basic decency afforded to all subjects of this crown. This is an injustice, and it ends today." A wave of muttering swept through the crowd. Lord Valerius took a step forward, his hand on the prince's arm. "Your Highness, this is unwise," he hissed, his voice low but audible to me. Alaric shook him off. "What is unwise, my lord, is allowing ignorance to rule over reason," he declared loudly, for all to hear. Then he delivered the blow that stunned the entire kingdom. "I, Prince Alaric, heir to the throne of Eldoria, find these superstitions to be not only false but treasonous, for they question the divine providence that protects this land. To prove once and for all the falsehood of this curse, I hereby declare my official intention to court the Lady Lyra." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence so deep and profound that I could hear the frantic beating of my own heart. People stared, their mouths agape. Lady Edith's face went from pinch to a mask of pure, murderous rage. Lord Valerius looked as if he might faint. I was frozen, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't have conjured in my wildest imaginings. A pawn in a royal game. He wasn't finished. We will conduct this courtship in the public eye, and if no great calamity befalls this kingdom between now and the harvest moon, a date you all know is of great celestial significance, I will take her as my wife. With that final, earth-shattering pronouncement, he took my hand. His grip was firm and warm, a startling anchor in the swirling chaos of my mind. The crowd finally broke its silence, not with a cheer, but with a roar of confusion, fear, and outrage. I stood there, hand in hand with the future king, feeling more alone and terrified than I ever had in my life. The courtship, as he called it, was the most surreal and agonizing performance of my life. I was moved from my small cottage to a suite of rooms in the local lord's manor where the prince was staying. The servants there treated me with a terrified deference, leaving my food outside my door and scurrying away before I could see them. Our first public outing was a walk through the market, with Alaric at my side. The villagers no longer threw stones or insults. Instead, they simply melted away. We walked through a corridor of silence, the people parting before us like the Red Sea, their eyes filled with a new kind of dread. It was as if I was no longer just a curse, but a curse with the power of the throne behind it. "Is it always like this?" Alaric asked, his voice a low murmur, as we passed a baker who hastily shuttered his window. "This is a great improvement," I replied, my voice tight. "Usually there's more shouting." I meant it to be sarcastic, but it came out sounding brittle and sad. He looked at me, a flicker of something, regret, perhaps, in his stormy eyes. "I'm sorry, Lyra. I thought my presence would shield you." "It doesn't shield me," I said, looking straight ahead. "It puts me in a much larger cage." The formal dinners were worse. We sat at the head of the long table in the manor's dining hall, surrounded by local dignitaries and members of Alaric's retinue, including the ever-present Lord Valerius and a seething Lady Edith. The silence was so thick you could have sliced it with a dinner knife. People ate with their eyes fixed on their plates, the clinking of silverware unnaturally loud in the cavernous room. Alaric tried to force conversation, asking about trade routes and harvest yields, but he was met with monosyllabic answers. All the while, I could feel Edith's venomous gaze on me from across the table. She was watching my every move, waiting for me to spill a glass of wine, or use the wrong fork, any small misstep she could use as evidence of my unsuitability. But in the small, stolen moments away from the public eye, something shifted. One afternoon, to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the manor, Alaric suggested we ride out to the edge of the royal forests. Away from the staring eyes, the tension between us eased. We rode in silence for a while, just the two of us and his guard Brennan, who kept a respectful distance. He started asking me about my garden, and I found myself talking about it with an ease that surprised me. I told him about companion planting, about how marigolds could protect tomato plants, about the medicinal properties of yarrow and chamomile. He listened, truly listened, with a focused intensity that was both unnerving and deeply flattering. In return, he spoke of his own passion, astronomy. He told me about his nights spent in the Royal Observatory, charting the movements of distant stars and nebula. He spoke of the mathematical precision of the cosmos, the great, beautiful, logical dance of the universe. "How can people who can calculate the orbit of a comet," he mused, looking up at the sky, "still believe a child's birth can sour the earth?" In that moment, he wasn't a prince, and I wasn't a curse. We were just two people, sharing a quiet wonder for the natural world. I saw past the arrogant royal who had turned my life upside down, and saw a man who felt just as trapped as I did, albeit in a much more gilded cage. He saw past the timid, cursed girl, and saw a woman with a sharp mind and a quiet strength that fascinated him. A fragile, tentative connection began to form between us, a tiny sprout of green in the barren soil of our public charade. This budding connection did not go unnoticed. The opposition, led by Lord Valerius and Lady Edith, began to mobilize in earnest. Valerius, a man who saw tradition and stability as the cornerstones of the kingdom, truly believed I was a threat. He argued relentlessly with Alaric in private. Your Highness, you play with fire, the people are frightened. The court is in an uproar. Our allies will see this as a sign of instability. You must end this madness. Alaric, however, was stubborn. The more Valerius pushed, the more he dug in his heels. His public defiance was morphing into a private conviction. Lady Edith, her motives far more personal, took a more insidious approach. She returned to the capital and began a subtle but vicious whisper campaign. Stories began to circulate through the court about the ill fortune that followed in my wake. When I was finally brought to the royal palace in Eldoria's capital, a sprawling confection of white stone and soaring towers, the campaign escalated. I was given chambers in a secluded wing, but the palace staff treated me like a leper. A prize-winning rosebush in the Queen's garden, one that I had paused to admire, mysteriously withered and died overnight. A priceless historical tapestry in the Grand Hall, located just outside my corridor, was discovered one morning with a long, unraveled thread, as if it were coming undone. Each incident was small, explainable, but they built upon one another. Edith and Valerius presented them to the king and the council as irrefutable proof. You see, the curse follows her, Valerius would intone grimly. It is a subtle rot, eating away at the foundations of the kingdom. Alaric furiously dismissed their claims as manufactured nonsense, but the seeds of fear were potent. I felt the atmosphere in the palace grow colder, more hostile. The few ladies-in-waiting assigned to me would flinch if I brushed past them. I was more isolated in that vast, beautiful palace than I had been in my tiny cottage. I began to doubt myself. What if they were right? What if I really did bring misfortune everywhere I went? The weight of their hatred and fear was a physical pressure, and I felt the walls of my carefully constructed dignity begin to crack. The harvest moon was approaching, and with every passing day, the sense of impending doom grew heavier. Our strange courtship continued within the palace walls, a series of carefully managed public appearances. One of the most excruciating was the annual royal hunt. Alaric insisted I attend, another demonstration of his defiance. I was dressed in a fine velvet riding habit, a costume that felt utterly alien on me. I hated the idea of the hunt, the senseless slaughter of beautiful animals for sport. As the horns blared and the hounds bayed, a wave of revulsion washed over me. Lady Edith, an expert horsewoman, was in her element, laughing and calling out to the other nobles, positioning herself always near the prince. She looked at me with open contempt, as if my very presence was a stain on the ancient tradition. Alaric rode beside me, his expression grim. You don't approve, he stated. Not a question. I think the forest has given us enough without us needing to steal the lives within it for a day's entertainment, I replied quietly. A small smile touched his lips. I agree. He then leaned closer, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. The largest bucks tend to graze near the Whispering Falls, to the east. The path is marked by silver birch trees. Then he added, the path to the west, through the dense oaks, is much more scenic, and the ground is notoriously difficult for the hounds to track any scent. I understood immediately. Throughout the day, whenever it was my turn to suggest a direction for the party, I guided them west. I spoke of a rare flower I thought I spotted, or a unique rock formation mentioned in an old book. The other nobles, particularly Edith, grew frustrated with the fruitless chase, but Alaric backed my every suggestion with regal authority. We returned to the castle at dusk, empty-handed, much to the fury of the hunting master. Edith shot me a look of pure poison, knowing somehow that I had outmaneuvered her. Alaric gave me a subtle, appreciative nod when no one was looking. It was a small victory, a shared secret that felt like a warm stone in my hand. Our quiet moments of connection often happened in the one place we could escape the prying eyes of the court, the royal library. It was a vast circular room, smelling of old paper and leather, with shelves that soared up to a domed ceiling painted with constellations. Alaric, it turned out, was as much a scholar as he was a prince. We would spend hours there in the evenings, a fire crackling in the hearth. He showed me ancient astronomical charts, their pages brittle with age, and explained the complex mathematics behind predicting eclipses. "The very event that condemned you," he said softly, tracing a diagram with his finger, "is one of the most predictable, most rational events in the cosmos. It's just a shadow, Lyra, nothing more." In turn, I showed him books on botany and herbalism I had found tucked away in dusty corners. I explained how the right combination of plants could create a powerful healing poultice, how the phases of the moon affected plant growth. He was fascinated by the intricate, hidden systems of the natural world. "It's a different kind of science," he admitted, "one of observation and patience. It's not so different from watching the stars." One evening, we were sitting side by side at a large oak table, poring over an old, hand-drawn map of the kingdom. Our hands brushed as we both reached for the same spot, the uncharted northern mountains. A jolt, like static electricity, passed between us. We both pulled back quickly, a sudden, awkward silence falling over the room. The air was thick with something new, something that had nothing to do with curses or politics. It was a terrifying, wonderful feeling, and it made the danger we were in feel both more immediate and somehow less important. This growing closeness did not escape Lady Edith. She saw the way Alaric looked at me when he thought no one was watching. Her jealousy, already a potent force, began to curdle into something far more dangerous. She confronted me one afternoon in the palace's rose garden. I was admiring the blooms, the one place that reminded me of my own small garden back home. She appeared as if from nowhere, a vision in crimson silk, her two ladies-in-waiting hovering behind her like shadows. "Enjoying the palace, Mud Girl?" she began, her voice dripping with venom. I refused to rise to the bait. "The gardens are beautiful, my lady," I said calmly. She stepped closer, her scent of expensive perfume cloying and aggressive. "Do not mistake the prince's pity for affection. He is making a point. You are his political statement, a walking, breathing billboard for his defiance. When he grows tired of his game, you will be cast aside, and you will have nothing." I met her cold, furious eyes without flinching. "The prince's motivations are his own, my lady. I have asked for nothing, and I expect nothing. I have always known how to have nothing. I dare say I'm much better at it than you are." Her perfectly painted face contorted with rage. For a second, I thought she might strike me. "You think you're clever?" she hissed, her voice a low threat. "But you are a blight, and blights are always, eventually, cut out and burned. The harvest moon is coming, and with it, your ruin." She swept away, leaving me standing there, my heart pounding. Her words were a threat, but they were also a promise. She was not merely going to wait for misfortune to strike, she was going to create it. The week before the harvest moon dawned with an air of electric tension. The entire kingdom seemed to be holding its breath. Then the disaster struck. It wasn't a plague, or a flood, or a military defeat. It was something far more symbolic, far more insidious, the Grand Orrery of Eldoria, housed in the central dome of the Royal Observatory, ground to a halt. The Orrery was more than just a machine, it was the masterpiece of Eldorian science and artistry. A vast, intricate clockwork model of the solar system, its gears and rings of brass and silver tracked the movements of the planets with perfect precision. It was the source of the kingdom's official timekeeping, the heart of its navigation, and the ultimate symbol of reason triumphing over chaos. And now it was silent. Its golden sun no longer turned, its silver moon hung motionless in its track. The silence from the observatory dome was more terrifying to the people of the capital than any war cry. It was an omen of the highest order. The curse, the whispers said, had finally shown its true power. It had not struck at the crops or the livestock. It had struck at the very heart of the kingdom's soul. Panic began to ripple through the city streets. Lord Valerius and Lady Edith seized their moment. They moved with the swift, deadly precision of predators who had been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They called for an emergency session of the Royal Council, held in the throne room itself. The king, a man whose health was failing and whose will was easily swayed by his trusted advisor, presided over the meeting, his face pale and etched with worry. I was summoned to attend, not as a guest, but as a prisoner brought to trial. I stood in the center of the vast circular room, under the gaze of the assembled lords and ladies of the realm. Alaric stood by his father's side, his face grim, his knuckles white where he gripped the arm of his chair. Lord Valerius stood before the council, his voice ringing with righteous fury. My lords, my ladies, for weeks I have warned of this. I have pleaded with the prince to end this folly. He brought this woman, he spat the word, pointing at me, into the heart of our kingdom. And now, the heart of our kingdom has ceased to beat. The grand Ori, the work of 3 generations of our finest minds, is broken. Is there any one of you who can call this a coincidence? Murmurs of agreement and fear swept through the council. Lady Edith then stepped forward, her face a mask of practiced sorrow. I have prayed for our kingdom, she said, her voice trembling artfully. I have prayed that this curse would not touch us all, but its power is too great. It is a subtle poison that has now reached the center of all we hold dear. We must purge it before it is too late. She looked directly at Alaric, her eyes full of false pity. Prince Alaric, we know your heart is noble, but your chivalry is misplaced. For the good of the kingdom, for the sake of your people, you must renounce her. Cast her out. Let the kingdom heal. The council erupted. She's right, one lord shouted. End this now, cried another. The pressure in the room was immense, a physical force directed entirely at Alaric. His father, the king, looked at him, his expression pleading. Son, the king said, his voice weak. They are right. This has gone too far. End it. All eyes were on Alaric. This was his final test. His grand experiment had failed spectacularly. The entire political structure of the kingdom was demanding he abandon me to save them, to save himself. I held my breath, bracing myself for the inevitable. He was a prince, and I was a pariah. A kingdom would always outweigh a single cursed girl. I watched him, and in that terrible suspended moment I saw him look at me. His gaze wasn't one of pity or regret. It was one of fierce, unwavering resolve. Alaric rose from his seat, his movements calm and deliberate. The room fell silent. No, he said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the chamber. He then looked around at the council members, his gaze sweeping over them with cold disdain. You speak of curses and omens. You allow fear to cloud your judgment like children afraid of the dark. If this kingdom is so fragile that its faith can be shattered by a jammed gear, then it deserves to fall. Lord Valerius scoffed. A jammed gear? Your Highness, this is divine wrath. Is it? Alaric replied, a dangerous edge to his voice. He turned and signaled to the guards at the door. Or is it simply malice? The doors opened and 2 figures entered. The first was Brennan, Alaric's guard captain. The second was Master Horatio, the royal mechanist, a frail old man with oil-stained fingers and eyes that shone with fierce intelligence. He clutched a small, velvet-wrapped object in his hands. For the past few weeks, Alaric announced, his voice like steel, I have had Captain Brennan investigate the series of misfortunes that have plagued the palace since Lyra's arrival. The Queen's prize rosebush, for instance. It did not wither from a curse. It was poisoned with silver leaf nightshade, a substance that leaves a unique crystalline residue in the soil. A nervous stir went through the council. The unraveling tapestry, Alaric continued, was not the work of ill fortune. The thread was cleanly cut, high up where it would not be easily noticed, with a small, serrated blade of the type often found on a lady's decorative dagger. He paused, letting his words sink in, his eyes briefly flicking towards Edith, who had gone deathly pale. And now the orrery, Alaric said, turning to the mechanist. Master Horatio, please, tell the council what you found. The old man shuffled forward and unwrapped the velvet cloth. He held up a small, exquisitely crafted brass gear, no bigger than his thumb. One side of it was horribly corroded, the fine teeth eaten away as if by a powerful acid. Your Majesties, my lords, the mechanist began, his voice surprisingly strong. The orrery was not broken. It was sabotaged. This is the celestial timing escapement. It was deliberately damaged. I found traces of a corrosive agent, an alchemical compound. It is quite rare, formulated to be fast-acting on specific metal alloys. Alaric let the silence hang for a moment before he delivered the final, devastating blow. A rare alchemical compound, he repeated slowly, his eyes locking onto Lady Edith. One known for its use in certain cosmetic treatments, to lighten the skin. A compound that Lady Edith is known to import from the Southern Isles at great expense. The entire council turned as one to stare at Edith. All the color drained from her face. She looked like a statue carved from ice. "It's a lie," she stammered, her voice a shrill cry. "A vicious lie." "Is it?" Alaric countered, taking a step towards her. "Then you would not object to Captain Brennan searching your chambers for any remaining vials of this facial cream? Or for the decorative dagger that matches the cuts on the tapestry?" Edith crumbled. All her poise, all her arrogance evaporated in an instant. She began to sob, a wretched, panicked sound. "It was Valerius," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the advisor. "It was his idea. He said it was for the good of the kingdom. He said we had to expose her as a fraud." Lord Valerius stared at her, his face a mask of pure disbelief and fury at her betrayal. "You foolish, hysterical girl," he roared. But it was too late. The trap had been sprung. Alaric's grand gesture hadn't just been a test of the people's fear, it had been a baited hook for the real poison that had been festering in his court all along. The curse was real, but it had never been mine. The immediate aftermath was swift and decisive. Faced with Edith's confession and the mounting evidence, Lord Valerius's denials collapsed into blustering rage. Both he and Lady Edith were arrested for treason against the crown. The truth of their conspiracy was made public within the hour. Royal criers stood in every square, announcing the sabotage of the Grand Ori and the plot to frame an innocent woman. The narrative of my life, a story that had been set in stone for 2 decades, shattered in a single afternoon. I wasn't the cursed maiden. I was the victim of a malicious, high-born plot. The shift in public opinion was dizzying. Fear and hatred were replaced by a profound and uncomfortable shame. The people who had crossed the street to avoid me now could not meet my eyes. In the following days, small delegations from Silver Creek made the journey to the capital to offer their apologies. The baker whose window had been shuttered, the merchant who had thrown my apples in the gutter, the woman who had warned her child about my shadow, they stood before me in the palace's receiving hall, their heads bowed, their apologies clumsy and full of self-conscious guilt. I accepted their words with a quiet grace. I told them I understood, but understanding and forgetting are 2 very different things. The scars of 2 decades of cruelty ran deep, and their newfound remorse could not erase them. It was Alaric who stood by my side through it all, his presence a silent, solid statement of support. He did not force me to forgive, he simply made sure I never had to face them alone. That night, after the last of the apologies had been given, I felt a desperate need for quiet and space. I found my way to the Royal Observatory. The great dome was open to the night sky, and the stars were a brilliant, scattered dust of diamonds against black velvet. The Grand Ori stood silent in the center of the room, a wounded giant. I stood there for a long time, just breathing, feeling the cool night air on my face. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Alaric. The pretense that had defined our every interaction was finally gone. There were no courtiers to watch, no public to perform for. It was just us. He walked to stand beside me, his gaze on the stars. "I am sorry, Lyra," he said, his voice low and heavy with sincerity. "For all of it, my plan was arrogant and reckless. I used you as a piece in my game against the court. I never stopped to consider the true cost to you, the pain it would cause." I looked at his profile, silhouetted against the starlight. It was terrifying, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper, but it was also the first time in my life that anyone has ever truly fought for me. You stood for me when it would have been easier to cast me aside. You believed in me when no one else would. He turned to face me, his stormy eyes searching mine. It started as a point of principle, he confessed, an act of defiance. But then I got to know you. I saw your strength, your intelligence, your incredible grace in the face of so much ugliness. My admiration for your dignity turned into something else, something much deeper. My heart, which I had guarded for so long, felt as if it were about to beat out of my chest. I set out to prove a curse was false, he said, taking a step closer, and I ended up finding the truest thing in my life. Tears welled in my eyes, tears of relief, and a hope so powerful it was painful. I was so afraid, I whispered, afraid of what everyone thought of me. But I think I was most afraid of what I was starting to feel for you. He reached out and gently brushed a tear from my cheek with his thumb. The simple touch was more intimate, more real than any of our staged public appearances. Don't be afraid any more, Lyra, he murmured, and then he leaned in and kissed me. It was not a prince's kiss or a political statement. It was a kiss of profound apology and breathtaking promise. It was gentle and searching and full of all the words we had not been able to say. Under the silent, watching stars, surrounded by the beautiful, broken machine that had almost been our undoing, the make-believe courtship ended, and our real story finally began. A year later, the kingdom celebrated the Harvest Moon Festival. The air in the capital was thick with the scent of roasted nuts and spiced cider, and the streets were filled with music and laughter. The Grand Ori was working again, its celestial bodies once more tracing their silent, perfect paths. Its restoration had been a national project, and it now contained a new small gear carved not from brass, but from the heartwood of a silver birch tree. A gear I had designed, a symbol of nature and science, superstition and reason, finding their harmony at last. The people of Eldoria no longer whispered about the cursed maiden. Now they spoke with affection and respect of Princess Lyra. My name was no longer a synonym for misfortune. My knowledge of botany, once a private solace, had become a public gift. I had worked with the royal agronomists, introducing new methods of crop rotation and soil enrichment learned from the wild plants in my forgotten garden. That year, the kingdom saw a record harvest. The granaries were overflowing. The prosperity was real, tangible, and the people saw it not as the lifting of a curse, but as the blessing of a wise and caring princess. I stood on the balcony of the palace, Alaric's hand warm in mine, watching the fireworks paint the night sky in bursts of emerald and sapphire. He leaned over, his lips close to my ear. "Are you happy?" he whispered. I looked out at the joyous crowds, at the thriving city, and then I looked at him, at the love and respect shining in his eyes. "Happier than I ever knew was possible," I replied, and my heart felt as full and bright as the harvest moon hanging above us. Looking back on it all now, I realized that the greatest curse was never the one they placed on me. The real curse was the fear that lived in their own hearts, a fear of the unknown that made them cruel. I learned that dignity is not something that can be given to you or taken away. It is a quiet fire you tend within yourself, especially when the world outside is cold. And I learned that true love is not about grand, public declarations or chivalrous gestures. It's about the quiet moments. It's about seeing the person someone is when no one else is looking, and choosing to stand with them, not to save them, but simply to be by their side. My story started with a lie that defined me, but it was a pretend love that allowed me to find my true self. I would love to hear your story in the comments below. Have you ever been misjudged or labeled unfairly by those around you? How did you find the strength to stay true to yourself? Your stories give so much strength to others in this community, so please don't hesitate to share. And of course, if my story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories about overcoming the odds. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey today, for listening to my story. And remember, the label someone else gives you never has to be the story you choose to live.